Today we will be reading The Girl Who Loved the Wind. Once many years ago, a country fair to the east, there lived a wealthy merchant. He was a widow, and he had an only daughter, named Diana. She was dainty and beautiful, and he loved her more than he loved all his treasures. Because Diana was his only child, the merchant wanted to keep her from anything that might hurt her, harm her in any way. And so he decided to shut her away from the world. When Diana was still an infant, her father brought her great house, which he had built in the shore of the sea. On three sides of the house rose three huge walls. On the fourth side was the sea itself. In the lovely, lonely place, Diana grew up knowing everything that was her father's heart, but nothing in the world. In her garden grew every kind of fair fruit and flower, for so her father willed it. And on the table was every kind of fresh fish and fowl, for so her father ordered, in a room where the finest furnishing, gaily colored books and happily music, light dancing, and bright paintings filled her days, and the servants were instructed always to smile and never to say no, and to be cheerful through the year. So her father wished it, and so it was done. And for many years nothing had touched Diana in any way. Yet the spring day, Diana stood by her window, gazing at the sea. A breeze blew salt across the waves and whipped her hair about her face. It blew in corners of her room, and as it moved, it whistled a haunting little tune. Diana had never heard such thing before. It was sad, but it was beautiful. It engrossed and it boggled her. It caused her to sigh and clap her hands. "Who are you?" asked Diana. And the wind answered, "Who am I? I call myself the wind. I slap at ships and sparrows and saw through broken windows. I shiver snow and sandstorms. I am not always kind." "How particular," said Diana. "Here you merrily rustle the trees and play with the leaves and calm the birds in their nests." "I am not always kind," said the wind again. "Everyone here is always kind. Everyone here is always happy." "Nothing is always," said the wind. "My life is always," said Diana. "Always happy." "But life is not always happy," said the wind. "Mine is," Diana said. "How sad," whispered the wind in a corner. "What do you mean?" asked Diana. But the wind only whirled through the window, carrying one of her silk scarves, and before she could speak again, he had blown to the sea. Days went by, happy days. Yet sometimes in her room, Diana would try to sing Wind's song. She couldn't quite remember the words and recall the tune, but its strangeness haunted her. Finally, one morning she asked her father, "Why isn't life always happy?" "Life is always happy," replied her father. "That's what I told him," said Diana. Told who? Asked her father. He suddenly frightened that someone would take his daughter away. The wind, said Diana. The wind doesn't talk, said her father. He called himself the wind, she replied. But father did not understand. And so when a passing fisherman found Diana's scarf far at sea and returned it to the merchant's house, who was rewarded with beating and the merchant's supper, the fisherman was the one who called himself the wind. One summer day, weeks later, the sun was reflected in petals in the flowers. Diana strolled in her garden. Suddenly, the wind leaped over the high wall and pushed and pulled the top of trees. He sang his strange song, and Diana clasped her hands and sighed. Who are you? Whispered. Who am I? Said the wind. He sang. Who am I? I call myself the wind. I've worked the sails and windmills. I've whirled the sand in the deserts. I've wrecked 10,000 gallons, and I am not always kind. I knew it was you, said Diana, but one believed me. And the wind danced around the gardens and made the flowers bow. He caressed the birds and the trees and played gently with the feathers on their wings. You said you are not always kind, said Diana. You say you have done many unkind things. But all I do is see that you are gentle and good, but not always kind, reminded the wind. Nothing is always. It is sad that beyond the wall, sometimes sad and something happens, said the wind. But different each day, said Diana. Very different. How strange, Diana said. There are things always the same, always beautiful, happy, good. How sad, said the wind. How dull. And he leaped over the wall and blew out into the world. Come back, shouted Diana, rushing in the wall, but her voice was lost against the stones. Just then her father came into the garden and saw his daughter standing by the wall crying at the top. He ran over to her. Who are you calling? Who has been here? He demanded. The wind, said Diana. Her eyes brightened with a memory. He sang me his song. The wind does not sing, her father said. Only men and birds sing. This was not a bird, said his daughter. Then thought her father, it must have been a man. And he resolved to keep Diana from the garden, locked out of her garden. Diana began to wander up and down the long corridors of his house, and what up once had seemed like a palace to her began to feel like a prison. Everything seemed false, and the happy smells of the servant saw smiles of pity and ignorance. The gay dancing seemed to hide broken hearts, and the bright paintings hid sad thoughts, and soon Diana found herself thinking of the wind every moment, humming the song in the walls. His song about the world, sometimes happy, sometimes sad, but full of change and challenge. Her father, who was not cruel, but merely foolish, could not keep her locked up completely. Once a day, an hour, he allowed Diana to walk along the beach, but 3 merchants walked before her. 3 merchants walked behind, and the merchant himself watched from a covered chair. One chilly day, the fall at the tops of the waves rolled in the white and shore. Diana strolled the beach, pulled her cape around in warmth, and 3 Myrmidons before her and 3 Myrmidons behind shivered coldly. Her father, in his covered chair, pulled the blanket out of his chin and stared at the sea. He was cold and unhappy, but he was more afraid than to leave Diana alone. Suddenly, the wind blew across the capes and waves tossing foam in the air, and Diana turned to welcome him, stretching out her arms, and the cape blowed behind her and the wings of a giant bird. "Who are you?" thundered Diana's father, jumping up in his chair. The wind spun around Diana and sang, "Who am I? I call myself the wind. I am not always happy. I am not always kind." "Nonsense!" roared Diana's father. "Everyone here is happy and kind. I shall arrest you for trespassing," and shouted, "Guards!" But before guards could come, Diana spread her cape in the water. Then she stepped into it, raised the corner, and waved goodbye to her father, and blowing wind filled the capes and cornered like a sail ship. And before Diana's father had time to call out, she was gone. And the last thing he saw was a blowing cape as Diana and the wind sailed far to the west and never into the ever-changing world. The end.